History is often told in grand events, wars, speeches, conquests, and assassinations. Yet between these monumental moments lie the quiet, unseen fragments of life, the personal thoughts, fears, and reflections of the people who shaped the world. One of the most tantalizing what-ifs of history revolves around Julius Caesar, the man whose ambition reshaped the Roman Republic forever. While his life has been chronicled in biographies, histories, and plays, an extraordinary question remains. What was Caesar thinking on the last night before his fateful assassination? Imagine, for a moment, a Roman villa, bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps. The air carries the mingled scents of wine, incense, and the earthy fragrance of the gardens outside. Inside, a man, the ruler of Rome, moves quietly through his chambers, alone with his thoughts. Perhaps he writes by the flickering light, a diary in hand, recording reflections on loyalty, power, mortality, and the future of the city he loves and fears. This intimate perspective, lost to time, opens a window into a Caesar rarely glimpsed in history, a man capable of doubt, introspection, and humanity. The lost diary of Julius Caesar, though never recovered, has long captured the imagination of historians and storytellers. What did he foresee? Did he anticipate the conspiracy brewing around him? Did he write of regrets, triumphs, or the solitude of power? By exploring the possibilities within these final hours, we not only step closer to understanding Caesar as a person, but also gain insight into the precarious nature of leadership and the silent weight of responsibility. This script embarks on a journey into that lost diary, blending historical facts with careful imagination to recreate the last night of Julius Caesar. Each section will illuminate different facets of that night: the political anxieties, personal reflections, interactions with confidants, and the haunting shadow of destiny. Through this exploration, we aim to bring history to life in a calming, reflective, and compelling way. Section 1. The Evening Shadows and Caesar's Private Reflections. The final night of Julius Caesar begins as twilight settles over Rome. The sky is a tapestry of purples and deep blues, with the last remnants of daylight fading behind the hills that cradle the city. Within his villa, Caesar moves slowly, the rhythmic clatter of sandals against stone floors echoing softly in the quiet. Outside, the Tiber glimmers faintly, carrying with it the sounds of the city winding down, the distant calls of merchants closing their shops, the soft clinking of dishes, and the whisper of the wind through cypress trees. Caesar's study is modest compared to the grandeur of his public life. Heavy curtains drawn against the evening chill create a cocoon of shadow and amber lamplight. On his writing desk lies parchment, ink, and a bronze stylus. He is alone, yet he is never truly alone. The weight of Rome, the expectations of the Senate, and the loyalty or betrayal of those closest to him accompany him in the silence. The diary, if it existed, would have captured this rare intimacy. Caesar not as the conqueror, not as the dictator, but as a man facing the solitude that power inevitably brings. In these private reflections, he likely contemplates the delicate balance between admiration and envy, love and betrayal. Caesar's life had been a succession of victories: the conquest of Gaul, his triumphs in the Senate, and the loyalty of legions who followed him across continents. Yet, victory always comes with shadows. Those who celebrate with one hand often plot with the other. Caesar may have felt the familiar tension between trust and suspicion, aware that some allies harbored ambitions he had overlooked, or worse, suppressed grudges against him. Perhaps he wrote of the city itself, the Rome he envisioned versus the Rome he actually governed. In his mind, he could hear the murmur of the forum, imagine the Senate in heated debate, and see the crowds in the streets reacting to each decree. He understood Rome as a living organism, fragile and unpredictable. The diary might have revealed a man who, despite his unmatched intellect and charisma, wrestled with the same anxieties and uncertainties as any mortal ruler. He may have questioned the permanence of his legacy. Would the reforms he had painstakingly enacted endure, or would they crumble like so many empires before him? The diary, as historians speculate, could also reveal a Caesar attuned to the quiet beauty of life outside politics. Perhaps he paused to notice the subtle scent of lilies in the courtyard garden, or the gentle rustle of olive trees in the night breeze. Even a figure as consumed by ambition as Caesar may have sought solace in small earthly pleasures: the taste of honeyed wine, the soft warmth of a lamp, or the familiar weight of a favorite scroll. In this imagined record, Caesar could have revealed the humanity that history often eclipses, a man of intellect and ambition, yet capable of quiet contemplation, wonder, and even melancholy. Political anxiety would have been unavoidable. The conspirators, senators who once pledged loyalty, had been moving in shadows, whispering among themselves, coordinating in secrecy. Caesar, even in private, could sense the shifting currents of power. He may have written of strategy, of how to reinforce his alliances, of which senators could be trusted and which posed imminent threats. His diary might contain the meticulous consideration of political moves, but also the emotional toll of realizing that loyalty in Rome was as fleeting as the evening shadows. Yet amidst these reflections, there would have been fleeting moments of hope and humor. Perhaps he jotted down a memory from his youth, the laughter of friends during a campaign, or an amusing anecdote from the forum. Such moments would have grounded him, reminding him that life, even in the corridors of absolute power, contains fragile pockets of joy. These small human details, the mental images of family, friends, and city life, provide contrast to the weight of impending danger, making Caesar's final night one of both tension and quiet introspection. As the night deepened, the flickering of the oil lamps threw the shadows of the villa's interior into irregular patterns, dancing across walls lined with maps, trophies, and scrolls. Caesar may have reflected on the nature of fate itself, a topic that weighed heavily on the minds of Romans. Was destiny an inexorable path, or could it be bent by intelligence and foresight? Even a man who had conquered the known world might have felt powerless against the invisible forces shaping his own end. The diary might have been a canvas for these musings, blending historical observation, philosophical reflection, and personal emotion into a record never meant for others' eyes. By the time the night reached its deepest hour, Rome would have grown quiet. The murmurs of the city faded, replaced by the sound of the Tiber flowing steadily through the darkness. Caesar, perhaps weary from days of political maneuvering and nights of contemplation, may have finally rested the stylus and leaned back, gazing at the ceiling or through a window at the stars. The diary, whether in ink or in memory, would have recorded a man who understood both the power and the fragility of life, the weight of leadership, and the inevitability of mortality. In this imagined reconstruction of Julius Caesar's last night, the diary serves as a bridge to the human side of history. It offers a glimpse into the mind of one of the most influential figures of antiquity, revealing the fears, hopes, and quiet joys that shaped his final hours. While the pages themselves are lost, the concept of the diary allows us to reflect on the universal themes of power, mortality, and the fleeting beauty of life, reminding us that even the most celebrated figures share in the intimate, personal experiences that define the human condition. Section 2. The Conspiratorial Whispers and Caesar's Uneasy Awareness. The night deepened, and a different kind of quiet settled over Rome. A tense, almost electric hush that even the flowing Tiber seemed to sense. Within the grand halls of the Senate, unseen by the citizens sleeping in the forum below, murmurs crept like shadows. Some say that the conspirators moved with practiced stealth, exchanging brief glances, whispered reminders, and coded phrases. Each step a carefully measured beat in the unfolding plan to end the life of the man who had become both their leader and, in their eyes, a dangerous tyrant. Though Caesar may not have known the full extent of the plot, the instincts that had served him so well during campaigns and political battles across Gaul and Italy could not have been entirely silent. As he reclined in the dim glow of his villa, the possibility of treachery likely gnawed at him. Caesar had faced enemies before, ambitious generals, rival senators, and foreign kings. But the threat closest to his power was always insidious, the betrayal of those closest to him. The conspirators were not strangers on a battlefield. They were men who dined at his table, who celebrated victories by his side, who swore loyalty in words that now may have been nothing but hollow promises. Each whispered conversation in shadowed corridors of the Senate would have been, in Caesar's mind, a ripple in a vast ocean of intrigue. The diary, if it existed, could have captured Caesar's attempts to unravel these whispers, to discern which senators were trustworthy and which were poised to strike. Perhaps he reflected on Cassius, whose sharp intelligence and apparent loyalty were shadowed by envy and resentment. Brutus, the son of Caesar's old friend, whose presence in the conspiracy may have been most painful to contemplate, loomed in his thoughts not merely as a political adversary, but as a symbol of personal betrayal. The diary might have recorded questions, both strategic and emotional, about the limits of trust, the fragility of alliances, and the ways in which ambition could corrode even the strongest bonds of friendship. The political atmosphere of Rome at this time was fraught with tension. Caesar's reforms had reshaped governance, diminished the unchecked power of the Senate, and elevated his personal authority to levels unprecedented in Roman history. While these actions had earned him the adoration of the people, they had simultaneously fostered resentment among the patricians, who saw the concentration of power in one man as a dangerous erosion of the republic. Every decree, every public appearance, every strategic maneuver had its consequences, and Caesar, though accustomed to navigating the complexities of political life, may have felt the weight of potential consequences pressing upon him more acutely than ever before. The diary could have provided a window into the tactical mind of Caesar in these final hours. He might have listed potential scenarios: how to respond if a coup were attempted in the Forum, which allies could rally troops in his favor, and which bridges and gates were vulnerable. Perhaps he considered contingency plans, even as he recognized the limits of foresight. Rome was a city of unpredictability, where loyalty was as shifting as the tides of the Tiber, and no strategy could completely guard against human ambition. Even as he contemplated political threats, Caesar may have balanced these reflections with observations on human behavior. He understood that conspiracies are born not only of fear or ambition, but also of perceived injustice. The diary could have revealed his thoughts on the motivations of those plotting against him, how envy, pride, and ideology intertwined to create a potent mix capable of undermining even the most formidable of leaders. Perhaps he wrote of the paradoxical nature of power. The greater the influence, the deeper the isolation, and the closer the danger of betrayal. Amid these reflections, Caesar may have turned to memory for solace. He could have recalled campaigns in Gaul, the loyalty of his legions, the moments of camaraderie that had punctuated the often brutal life of a military leader. Perhaps he envisioned the faces of ordinary Romans who had cheered his return from victorious campaigns, unaware of the intricate power dynamics that governed their city. In these memories, Caesar might have found a fleeting sense of peace, even as he acknowledged the precariousness of his present circumstances. In his private quarters, the contrast between the conspirators' calculated plotting and the serene domesticity of the villa would have been stark. The diary may have recorded his observations on the domestic world, the subtle clatter of a servant arranging oil lamps, the smell of a carefully prepared meal cooling on a side table, the muted sounds of Rome's quieter streets. These small details, though seemingly insignificant, might have provided grounding for a man navigating the immense pressures of leadership, reminding him of the humanity that lay beyond politics and power. As the night stretched on, Caesar's reflections may have turned toward philosophy. The Romans had long debated the nature of fate and free will, and Caesar, educated in both Greek and Roman traditions, would have been well versed in these questions. Perhaps he pondered whether destiny could be altered by cunning and strategy, or whether, as some philosophers suggested, certain events are inevitable, no matter how brilliant the planning. The diary could have revealed a man both proud of his intellect and deeply aware of its limits, a ruler who understood that even the greatest minds cannot fully escape the currents of destiny. The conspirators, in the shadows, would have been equally aware of the stakes. Their planning required precision, patience, and the ability to conceal their true intentions. Caesar's diary, if it existed, would have captured not only his awareness of potential betrayal, but also the subtle cues that betrayed the conspirators' presence. A servant's nervous glance, a misplaced parchment, a hushed voice in the distance. These small observations may have heightened his awareness, sharpening both his anxiety and his understanding of human nature. By the early hours of morning, the diary might have reflected a growing fatigue in Caesar, both physical and emotional. The anticipation of events yet to unfold would have weighed heavily on him, blending with reflections on mortality, legacy, and the fleeting nature of time. Perhaps he jotted down a final observation before sleep, a meditation on the fragility of life and the inexorable passage of hours, as well as the delicate line between triumph and tragedy. In imagining Caesar's diary during this night, we glimpse the convergence of personal reflection and political acumen. It portrays a man fully alive to the forces shaping his life, conscious of the loyalties and enmities surrounding him, and aware of the inexorable unfolding of history. Through these reflections, the lost diary becomes more than a historical curiosity. It becomes a testament to the human mind navigating the most extraordinary circumstances, a reminder that even the most powerful leaders are ultimately vulnerable to the complexities of human ambition, emotion, and fate. Section 3. Dawn approaches, Caesar's premonitions, and the weight of fate. As the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the heavy curtains of Caesar's villa, the city of Rome remained largely unaware of the monumental events poised to unfold. The streets, empty except for the occasional sentinel, carried the faint echoes of a city slowly awakening. Yet within the walls of the Senate and the private chambers of the ruler himself, a far different kind of tension had settled. Caesar, acutely aware that the dawn might bring either triumph or disaster, sat quietly reflecting on the night's uneasy hours, his mind balancing between reasoned strategy and an almost preternatural sense of impending destiny. In the diary, if it truly existed, one can imagine Caesar recording the subtle omens he might have noticed: a sudden chill in the morning air, the restless flight of a crow across the horizon, or the distant tolling of a bell from a nearby temple. The Romans had long believed in signs from the gods, messages hidden in the patterns of nature and human events. Caesar, educated in philosophy and religion, likely contemplated these phenomena not merely as superstition, but as subtle reminders of the forces beyond human control, an acknowledgement that the fates of men, even emperors, are sometimes dictated by powers unseen. The diary might have captured his innermost fears, those private anxieties rarely visible to the world. He was, after all, a man whose life had been defined by conquest, intellect, and political mastery, yet even he could not entirely insulate himself from the unpredictability of betrayal. Thoughts of Brutus and Cassius, close confidants who had meticulously cultivated the conspiracy, would have weighed heavily on him. Did he sense their intentions? Was there a moment in his memory where a glance or a word had hinted at the impending treachery. Such reflections would reveal a man not only brilliant and commanding, but profoundly human in his susceptibility to doubt and foreboding. Amid these anxieties, Caesar may also have wrestled with the philosophical question of fate versus free will. He had lived a life of deliberate choices, each decision shaping the trajectory of Rome and his own destiny. Yet now, at the cusp of what would become his final day, he may have recognized that certain events are inexorable. Perhaps he jotted thoughts in the diary about history itself, how leaders rise and fall, how the whims of fortune can elevate the mighty or crush them underfoot. The interplay between human agency and destiny likely dominated his thoughts, a meditation on the paradox that one can control much, yet remain powerless before the ultimate flow of time. As dawn deepened, Caesar's attention may have shifted to practical matters, blending strategy with the emotional weight of personal reflection. He could have considered the security of his household, the loyalty of his guards, the timing of his departure for the Senate, and the manner in which he would address his colleagues that morning. The diary might have contained meticulous notes, almost ritualistic in their care, as if the act of writing could fortify him against the unseen dangers awaiting him outside. Yet even in the midst of strategy, one senses a human fragility, the awareness that no plan, no matter how carefully constructed, can entirely guard against the treachery of those closest to you. Within the pages of the diary, there may have been fleeting moments of hope or resignation. Caesar, ever the pragmatist, might have reflected on the potential for survival, how loyal allies could intervene, how swift action might avert catastrophe. But these contemplations likely existed alongside darker musings, the awareness that betrayal is a human constant, that ambition often outweighs friendship, and that the great deeds of a lifetime can be undone in a single, decisive act. The interplay of hope and dread would have given the diary a rhythm both intimate and universally resonant, illustrating the tension between a leader's intellect and the vulnerability of the human heart. Dreams and premonitions could also have played a significant role in Caesar's early hours. Perhaps he awoke from a fitful sleep, with fragments of visions lingering in his mind, dreams in which Rome itself trembled, in which senators' faces were indistinct yet menacing, in which the triumphs of past campaigns were shadowed by a pervasive sense of doom. The diary, if it recorded these nocturnal impressions, would provide a rare glimpse into the private fears of a man whose public persona radiated unshakable confidence. Through these dreams, one sees the delicate balance between conscious strategy and the subconscious mind, how even the most calculated ruler can be haunted by the intangible currents of intuition and foresight. Despite the psychological weight of the morning, Caesar may have sought moments of personal grounding. He could have observed the sunrise over the distant hills, noting the subtle hues reflected in the Tiber, or listened to the faint clatter of early tradesmen preparing the forum for the day ahead. These small observations, though seemingly trivial, could have offered comfort and perspective, a reminder that the life of the city and the world extends beyond the machinations of political intrigue. Perhaps he wrote in the diary about these moments, noting how the ordinary beauty of life persists even when danger looms, an awareness that human experience is composed of both monumental events and quiet, grounding details. The diary may also have served as a space for Caesar to contemplate legacy. What would history remember of him? Would his deeds, reforms, and victories endure beyond the fragile arc of human life, or would they be eclipsed by the violent conclusion of a single day? Such reflections, written in the solitude of early morning, highlight the tension between personal ambition and the desire for enduring significance, a theme that resonates across centuries. The diary becomes more than a historical artifact. It becomes a meditation on mortality, memory, and the human need to leave a mark upon the world. As the city fully awoke, and the time approached for Caesar to leave for the Senate, the diary may have concluded with a mix of preparation and contemplation, thoughts of strategy, personal fears, philosophical reflection, and fleeting moments of beauty intertwined, forming a narrative that captures both the public and private dimensions of his life. The convergence of anticipation, anxiety, and acceptance in those early hours paints a portrait of a man fully aware of the precariousness of power, the complexity of loyalty, and the relentless passage of time. In imagining this diary entry, we witness a ruler at the intersection of fate and free will, a man who understood the vast machinery of Rome, yet recognized the intimate vulnerabilities of the human heart. The pre-dawn reflections illustrate how power and humanity coexist, how the mind navigates both strategic calculations and emotional truths, and how history itself is shaped not only by action, but by thought, awareness, and foresight. Through the imagined pages, we gain insight into the universal tension between control and uncertainty, ambition and mortality, consciousness and intuition, an experience both profoundly personal and historically transformative. Section 4. The Senate beckons. Caesar steps into the shadow of betrayal. The streets of Rome, now fully alive with the morning bustle, stood in stark contrast to the quiet intensity that gripped Julius Caesar as he made his way toward the Senate. Every footstep, every passing glance from citizens and merchants was part of a rhythm he had known all his life. Yet on this morning, it carried a strange dissonance, a subtle tension that seemed to echo the premonitions he had recorded in his private reflections. In his imagined diary, he may have noted these details, the ordinary sights and sounds of the city now tinged with a heightened awareness, as if each shadow and whisper hinted at the betrayal awaiting him. Caesar's procession to the Curia of Pompey, the Senate House, was marked by formality, yet beneath the outward appearance of control, the diary might reveal a man acutely conscious of danger. Guards flanked him, loyal companions, whose presence offered both comfort and a reminder of the precariousness of power. In the morning light, he may have noted the faces of fellow senators, some familiar and trustworthy, others marked by subtle expressions that, in hindsight, presaged the treachery about to unfold. Every gesture, every glance, was subject to his scrutiny, a blend of political acumen and intuitive perception, honed over decades of public life. As he approached the entrance to the Senate, the architecture itself seemed to embody the weight of history and consequence. The massive columns and carved stone told stories of Rome's enduring power, of victories won and republics challenged. Yet on this morning, they may have appeared to Caesar as silent witnesses to the fragile human dramas that played out beneath their shadow. In his diary, he could have reflected on how these edifices, symbols of both permanence and mortality, mirrored his own life, immense in achievement, yet vulnerable to the shifting loyalties of men. Inside the Senate, the atmosphere was subtly charged. Senators occupied their usual seats, yet the air was dense with anticipation, each man aware of the significance of the day. The diary may have captured Caesar's observations of the conspirators, Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, and others, their faces carefully composed, their gestures controlled. Perhaps he noticed the slight tightening of a jaw, the subtle avoidance of direct eye contact, the measured tones of conversation, small signs that, to the trained eye of a statesman, carried meaning far beyond ordinary debate. The conspirators, for their part, had orchestrated a carefully constructed tableau of loyalty and respect. They greeted Caesar with words of civility, gestures of camaraderie, and outward expressions of devotion. Yet beneath this veneer lay months of plotting, a calculated decision to strike at the very heart of Roman power. The diary might reveal Caesar's recognition of the duality in human nature, the way public appearances can mask private intentions, and the almost imperceptible cues that reveal what lies beneath. In this sense, the Senate chamber became both a stage and a battlefield, where the clash of intellect, ambition, and morality played out with subtle but profound force. As he took his seat, the diary might describe his internal state, a blend of alertness, cautious confidence, and an awareness of historical gravity. Caesar understood the mechanics of politics and the loyalty of soldiers, yet he was also a man who had experienced the capriciousness of human ambition. Thoughts of fate, premonitions, and strategy likely coalesced in his mind, forming a tapestry of perception that balanced reason with intuition. The diary would serve as both confidant and mirror, recording the quiet deliberations of a ruler who knew the precarious nature of power, even as he projected calm to those around him. The dialogue of the Senate began with customary discussions, debates over civic matters, and reports on provincial affairs. Yet beneath these official exchanges, Caesar may have perceived the subtle currents of tension, the unspoken signals of plotting. The diary might contain observations of the conspirators' interactions, how they positioned themselves, how they gestured when speaking, the rhythm of their breathing, all interpreted by a mind trained to detect signs of both loyalty and deception. In this space, politics and human psychology intertwined, revealing the vulnerability of even the most commanding leaders to the intricate dynamics of social behavior. Perhaps Caesar also reflected in his diary on the history of betrayal in Roman politics, recalling the fate of others who had risen to prominence only to be undone by those closest to them. He may have noted the recurring patterns of ambition, envy, and fear that shape human societies, recognizing that even a man of immense power is never immune to the designs of those around him. These reflections would imbue the diary with both philosophical depth and poignant realism, a meditation on the intersection of human agency, historical forces, and the ever-present shadow of mortality. At the same time, Caesar might have allowed himself small moments of observation beyond the immediate threat. The play of sunlight across the marble floors, the murmur of distant voices in the corridors, or the ceremonial rituals that punctuated the Senate's morning. These details, recorded in the imagined diary, would illustrate his capacity to find perspective amid tension, to perceive the continuity of life and civilization, even as personal peril loomed. Such reflections highlight the duality of human experience, the capacity to perceive both immediate danger and broader, enduring truths simultaneously. As the conspirators closed in, their subtle cues of coordination and timing, the diary may have noted Caesar's mounting awareness. While outwardly composed, inwardly he may have acknowledged a profound understanding of the stakes, an intuition sharpened by experience and perhaps guided by the premonitions he recorded in previous entries. The diary would capture the interplay between anticipation, strategy, and the emotional reality of a leader confronting the very real possibility of his own death, revealing both the brilliance and vulnerability of Julius Caesar in the final hours of his life. In imagining this entry, we gain a layered portrait of a ruler poised at the intersection of power, human psychology, and historical destiny. The Senate chamber becomes more than a physical space. It is a crucible where intellect, intuition, and fate converge. Caesar's diary, reflecting his awareness of both immediate danger and broader philosophical truths, allows us to witness history through the lens of consciousness, illuminating the subtle dynamics that shape monumental events. Through this lens, the narrative of betrayal becomes not only a historical record, but a meditation on perception, morality, and the fragile balance between control and vulnerability in the human experience. Section 5. The Fatal Strike. Caesar confronts betrayal. The morning had carried with it a strange stillness, a calm that belied the storm gathering within the walls of the Senate. Julius Caesar, seated with the grace and authority he had cultivated over decades, likely felt the subtle tension in the air, though it was masked by the routine of civic proceedings. In his imagined diary, he may have written of the ordinary, how the sunlight caught the columns, how the murmurs of the senators created a low hum that filled the chamber, and how even in such mundane observations, he sensed an undercurrent of something darker, something poised to disrupt the fragile order of the day. It is said that history is often defined by the moments when ordinary life intersects with extraordinary events, and for Caesar, this day was the intersection itself. The conspirators, who had long hidden their intentions beneath the veneer of loyalty, were positioned in a precise formation, their subtle coordination honed through months of secret planning. In the diary, he might have noted the positioning of Brutus, Cassius, and their accomplices, the calculated distance between them, and the careful alignment of their hands and eyes, as if an invisible choreography presaged the coming act. The tension escalated with small, almost imperceptible gestures, a cough, a shuffle of feet, a hesitant glance. Each became laden with meaning, filtered through Caesar's keen perception. The diary would have captured the duality of this experience. Outwardly, he maintained the composure of a seasoned leader, greeting the conspirators with customary politeness and offering a calm presence in the midst of political proceedings. Inwardly, he may have felt the prickling awareness of impending danger, an intuition sharpened by years of navigating the treacherous currents of Roman politics. The first physical confrontation may have seemed sudden to any observer, yet in the diary, it could be presented as the inevitable culmination of tension. As the conspirators advanced, Caesar might have recorded in precise detail the moment when one senator's hand gripped his arm, when the first dagger struck, and the sound of steel against flesh, a horrifying and intimate intrusion into the body of a man who had long wielded power over others. The diary would reflect both shock and clarity, capturing the paradoxical sensation of being both assaulted and yet acutely aware, every nerve alert, every thought crystallized into a heightened awareness of mortality. In these final moments, the diary would offer insights into Caesar's mind that no external account could convey. Perhaps he thought of the city he had governed, the reforms he had enacted, the victories he had won, and the betrayals he had narrowly avoided in the past. The entry might reveal his reflections on the fleeting nature of human ambition and the cruel caprice of fate, how the same men who once pledged loyalty could transform into agents of destruction. This meditation, written with the immediacy of experience, blends historical narrative with personal introspection, offering a deeply human perspective on an event often recounted only in its political or dramatic terms. The interaction with Brutus, in particular, would dominate the diary's account. History remembers Caesar's purported words, et tu, Brute, a recognition of betrayal from someone he considered a son in both affection and political alliance. In the imagined diary, this moment might be expanded to explore the emotional complexity, the shock of personal treachery, the realization of historical inevitability, and perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of the role that ambition, fear, and circumstance play in shaping human actions. It would capture the intimacy of betrayal in a way that external narration cannot, offering a window into the profound human dimensions of historical events. As the assault continued, the diary could record the physical sensations with vivid immediacy, the sting of the wounds, the sudden weakening of the body, the rush of pain interspersed with moments of mental clarity. Each stab would not only represent a literal attack, but also a symbolic fracture of trust and authority. Caesar's mind, sharp to the end, might have catalogued each face, each motion, the expressions of the men around him, the calculation, the fear, and the grim determination. In this way, the diary becomes both a medical account and a philosophical reflection, intertwining the corporeal and intellectual in a narrative of final confrontation. In the midst of chaos, the diary might reveal moments of reflection that transcend immediate danger. Perhaps Caesar considered the legacy of Rome itself, the ideals of the Republic, and the ways in which human ambition shapes both creation and destruction. These contemplations provide a counterpoint to the violence, illustrating a mind that even in the face of death, seeks to understand broader truths. He may have pondered the irony that a city he sought to strengthen and stabilize was the very stage upon which his life would be cut short, that the mechanisms of power could be wielded so precisely, yet so destructively by those closest to him. The final moments, as chronicled in this imagined diary, would blend sensory perception, political awareness, and emotional resonance. He may have written of the last glances exchanged, the fleeting recognition of loyalty lost, the sounds of the Senate, once filled with orderly debate, now echoing with panic and confusion. These reflections capture both the immediacy of personal experience and the timelessness of human vulnerability, showing how history is experienced not only through grand events, but through the intimate awareness of those who live them. Through this detailed and intimate lens, the assassination of Julius Caesar is transformed from a mere historical fact into a meditation on power, trust, mortality, and the human capacity for both betrayal and reflection. The diary provides a voice to a man often portrayed only in terms of his public deeds, giving depth to his awareness of the stakes, his understanding of human nature, and his perception of the historical forces converging upon him. In this way, the final entry becomes a living document of the human experience, a bridge between the grand narrative of history and the quiet, intensely personal consciousness of one of its central figures. Section 6. Chaos in the Senate. Witnessing history unfold. The air in the Senate chamber, once filled with the echoes of measured speeches and political maneuvering, erupted into pandemonium as Julius Caesar fell to the floor. Witnesses, some loyal friends, others neutral observers, were paralyzed with shock, their eyes wide, mouths agape, and hearts pounding in the realization that they were experiencing an event that would define history for centuries. In this imagined diary, Caesar might have turned his attention outward in his final moments, recording not just the physical sensations of pain and betrayal, but also the unfolding reactions of those around him, the trembling bodies, the whispered prayers, and the sudden flight of fear across the faces of senators who had long competed for influence and power. The conspirators, while executing their meticulously planned attack, were themselves acutely aware of the eyes watching them. The diary could capture this duality, the tension between the necessity of action and the awareness of historical observation. Cassius, Brutus, and their fellow plotters may have felt the thrill of purpose mingled with the gnawing fear that the act could spiral beyond their control. In the diary, Caesar might have noted the way Brutus's hands shook ever so slightly, the almost imperceptible hesitation in his stance, revealing the inner conflict of a man torn between personal loyalty and political conviction. For the witnesses, the shock of the assassination was compounded by the sheer brutality and intimacy of the act. Daggers, small yet deadly, left precise wounds, each one a statement of intent. Observers would have registered not just the violence, but also the symbolism of the betrayal, the fall of a man whose presence had dominated Rome's political landscape. The imagined diary captures this with a surreal clarity. The way the light caught the glint of steel, the scattered papers and sandals across the floor, and the horrified gasps of senators who had once shared friendly debates, now confronting the terrifying immediacy of mortality and treachery. Some witnesses attempted to intervene, though few could approach the tightly coordinated attackers. The diary could describe the frantic movements of men trying to protect Caesar, the sense of urgency and helplessness that rippled through the chamber. Perhaps one senator, unable to contain his loyalty, lunged toward the conspirators only to be repelled by sheer force. Others froze, paralyzed by the enormity of the event, unsure whether to flee, cry out, or attempt a futile defense. The chaos was a living organism, pulsing and twisting through the marble halls, and Caesar's diary might have captured the peculiar, almost hypnotic sense of observing one's own demise from a distance of heightened awareness. Beyond the immediate violence, the diary could also reflect on the psychological undercurrents that defined the Senate that day. Each senator's face told a story: fear, ambition, regret, or complicity. Caesar may have noted how some individuals stared wide-eyed, unable to reconcile the public persona of the leader they knew with the mortal vulnerability now laid bare before them. Others may have shown a chilling calm, perhaps already calculating how they could benefit from the chaos, how alliances might shift in the coming hours. Through these observations, the diary becomes a rich tapestry of human reaction, illustrating not only the power of history-making events, but also the intricate web of personalities that such events expose. Amidst this storm of emotion, the diary might pause to record small details that humanize the moment: a servant's cry, the fall of a ceremonial robe, the scattering of scrolls, or the fleeting glance of a child of one of the senators observing the scene. All these moments add texture to the narrative, blending the epic with the intimate. These subtle observations contrast with the grandeur of history, highlighting the interplay between monumental events and the miniature that make them real for those who live them. Political calculation mingled with grief and fear as the Senate reeled. Some conspirators may have sought to assert authority immediately, raising voices to explain their defense of the Republic, while others simply observed, waiting to gauge the reaction of their colleagues. Caesar's diary could have reflected on the paradoxical nature of these actions, the conspirators' attempt to impose order, even as their violence shattered it, their rhetoric of civic duty at odds with the visceral terror they had inspired. Such reflection provides insight into both the external events and the internal cognition of a leader facing death, a rare, intimate perspective lost to conventional historical accounts. The diary could also note the reactions beyond the chamber. Messengers, upon hearing of the assassination, would have rushed through the streets of Rome, spreading the news with a mix of urgency and uncertainty. Citizens, soldiers, and merchants alike were suddenly thrust into a moment where public and private lives intersected with history. Caesar's mind, keenly aware of the broader implications, might have traced these ripples, contemplating how the assassination would reshape alliances, provoke fears, and ignite discussions far beyond the immediate vicinity of the Senate. Even in the midst of chaos, the diary may have reflected a philosophical meditation on mortality and human ambition, the fleetingness of power, the fragility of life, and the unpredictable consequences of human action are all themes that might emerge as Caesar witnesses, even in his final hours, the intricate dance of cause and effect that would define the Republic's future. These reflections blend the immediacy of lived experience with timeless questions about the nature of leadership, loyalty, and human frailty. Finally, the diary might end the entry by acknowledging the surreal quality of observation. To witness one's own death, to perceive the shock and confusion of others, and to remain mentally acute, even as the body falters, creates a strange temporal distortion. Time stretches and compresses. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the event becomes both intensely personal and historically monumental. It is within this tension that the diary finds its narrative power, transforming what is often recounted as a straightforward political assassination into a profound meditation on human experience, perception, and legacy. Section 7. The political fallout. Rome reels after Caesar. As the news of Julius Caesar's assassination rippled through Rome, the city transformed from a bustling metropolis into a stage of shock, uncertainty, and tentative calculation. In the imagined diary of Caesar, this section would not only recount the immediate physical chaos within the Senate, but also extend outward, exploring the reaction of Rome's citizens, politicians, and soldiers. From the palaces to the marketplaces, the streets themselves seemed to vibrate with tension as word spread that the man who had dominated Roman politics and redefined power had been violently removed. The diary might first record the immediate political vacuum. With Caesar gone, the balance of authority in Rome shifted abruptly. Key figures like Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian, Caesar's political heirs and allies, found themselves thrust into a world of urgent decisions. Caesar could have noted in his final reflections the fragility of the institutions he had bolstered. The Senate, which had oscillated between reverence and resentment toward him, now faced the unenviable task of asserting authority in a vacuum that few were prepared to manage. The diary might emphasize the tension between continuity and chaos, as senators debated whether to support the conspirators, rally behind the remnants of Caesar's influence, or simply wait and see. Beyond the elite, the diary could explore the reaction of ordinary Romans. Marketplaces, bathhouses, and taverns became informal news centers where rumors raced faster than the truth. Some citizens expressed relief, believing the Republic might finally be free from what they perceived as Caesar's dominance. Others mourned, recognizing the potential for chaos and violence that could follow. The diary might describe the nervous excitement of children playing in the streets, unaware of the political implications, or merchants whispering about the security of their livelihoods, illustrating how monumental political events seep into daily life in ways both subtle and profound. Caesar's diary could capture the complex emotions of betrayal and loyalty that permeated the city. Citizens and soldiers alike were forced to reckon with the abrupt removal of a leader whose policies had stabilized many aspects of Roman life, yet also concentrated unprecedented power in one individual. Military commanders, many of whom had personal loyalty to Caesar, faced difficult decisions. Should they march on Rome to enforce order, side with the conspirators, or retreat and regroup? The diary might dwell on the irony that those who had once admired him for decisive action now confronted a world where his absence created uncertainty and hesitation. The conspirators themselves, central figures in this unfolding drama, experienced both empowerment and fear. Brutus and Cassius, who justified their actions as a defense of the Republic, had to navigate immediate threats of retaliation, public anger, and the potential for civil war. Caesar's diary could offer imagined insights into their mindset, the tension between moral conviction and the human desire for personal safety, the anxiety of knowing that their actions, though legally rationalized, might be seen as dishonorable by history. Their speeches to the Senate and public addresses, as recorded in this imagined account, could reveal both carefully constructed rhetoric and subtle cracks of fear, providing a psychological layer to the historical narrative. The diary might also reflect on the role of Mark Antony, whose famous oration at Caesar's funeral would later sway the population and ignite widespread unrest. Caesar's reflections could observe Antony's meticulous political instincts, his understanding of public sentiment, and his skill in turning grief into outrage. The contrast between the conspirators' calculated, immediate action and Antony's slow, deliberate orchestration of public opinion illustrates the unpredictable dynamics of political power. Action is only one half of influence. Perception and narrative complete the picture. Military forces loyal to Caesar became a pivotal factor in the immediate fallout. Legions stationed across Rome's territories had to make quick decisions about allegiance. The diary could depict the tension in military camps, officers debating whether to follow personal loyalty, institutional duty, or self-preservation, soldiers whispering among themselves, unsure if the Republic's ideals or their commander's legacy demanded obedience. Even distant provinces felt the tremors of the assassination, as governors and generals awaited instructions or interpreted the event in ways that served local interests. Amidst these grand political movements, the diary might pause to observe the human side of unrest. Families argued over loyalties. Street brawls broke out as rumor turned to accusation, and religious ceremonies attempted to impose a semblance of order on a society unmoored by sudden leadership loss. Caesar's imagined account could capture the poignancy of ordinary lives intersecting with extraordinary events. A baker's son hiding in a doorway, a senator's wife clutching her children, a street poet improvising verses to explain what the city could not yet comprehend. The diary could also examine the paradox of legacy. While the conspirators aimed to preserve the Republic, their actions inadvertently paved the way for further concentration of power in the hands of Antony, Octavian, and eventually the imperial system. Caesar might have reflected on the irony that death, meant to secure political ideals, instead amplified his influence and immortalized his vision. This awareness would blend the personal with the historical, demonstrating that the consequences of political acts are never contained within immediate intentions. Finally, this section of the diary might conclude with reflections on uncertainty and human resilience. Rome, a city of laws, traditions, and deeply rooted institutions, faced a moment where those structures seemed fragile against the force of individual action. Caesar could have observed that in moments of upheaval, human responses, courage, fear, ingenuity, and betrayal define history as much as grand policies or battlefield victories. Even in death, he might have acknowledged that his influence would endure, not just through statues and documents, but through the decisions, passions, and conflicts of those left behind. Section 8. The Funeral and Antony's Oration, Stirring Rome's Heart. In the imagined diary of Julius Caesar, Section 8 would focus on the aftermath of his assassination as the city prepared for his funeral. The streets of Rome, usually filled with commerce and chatter, became a stage of collective anticipation and tension. Citizens from all walks of life gathered to witness the procession, unsure whether they would see the rise of new leaders, the enforcement of order by the conspirators, or an eruption of public outrage that could ignite civil conflict. The diary would capture the surreal contrast between the pageantry of ceremony and the ominous uncertainty that gripped every corner of the city. Caesar might describe the meticulous preparations for his funeral, the laying out of his body in the forum, the adornment with garlands, and the construction of the funeral pyre. The diary could note the blending of personal ritual and political symbolism. The garlands not merely as tokens of respect, but as a declaration of Caesar's enduring presence in the public imagination. Citizens lining the streets, some mourning, some curious, and some fearful, would become actors in a drama that blurred the lines between grief and political theater. The diary would likely dwell on the tension surrounding Mark Antony's role as Caesar's loyal friend and military ally. Antony faced the delicate challenge of honoring the deceased while navigating the precarious political landscape. The diary could describe Antony's quiet observations of the Senate, the conspirators' wary glances, and the people's restless energy. He would sense that the oration could either calm the city or inflame it, and the weight of history pressed heavily upon him. The diary might capture Caesar's imagined anticipation of Antony's words, recognizing that rhetoric has the power to move hearts more effectively than armies ever could. When Antony finally addressed the crowd, the diary could note the carefully calculated structure of his speech. He began with humility, acknowledging the Senate's authority and the conspirators' claims to honor the Republic, but he gradually introduced subtle appeals to emotion. Antony displayed Caesar's will, revealed his wounds, and questioned the conspirators' motives without openly condemning them at first. The diary might reflect Caesar's astonishment at Antony's skill, blending pathos, subtle accusation, and civic pride into a performance that transformed public perception within moments. The people of Rome, as described in the diary, responded with a mix of awe and fury. Antony's oration awakened deep-seated loyalty and grief, catalyzing anger toward the conspirators. The diary could portray vivid scenes, citizens pressing against the funeral pyre, chanting Caesar's name, clutching remnants of his clothing, or hurling objects at the statues of senators who had betrayed him. The emotional intensity, observed by Caesar even in death, would underscore the fragile line between order and chaos in a society deeply invested in symbols, reputation, and personal allegiance. The diary might also explore the strategic brilliance behind Antony's rhetoric. By invoking shared memories of Caesar's accomplishments, victories in Gaul, reforms for the common people, public games, and contrasting them with the conspirators' actions, Antony turned the narrative from political reasoning into moral outrage. Caesar could have reflected on the power of storytelling and memory, noting that a single speech, imbued with emotion and context, could redefine reality and shape the course of history. The assassination, intended to preserve the Republic, now risked inciting a tide of civil unrest far beyond the conspirators' control. Amid the emotional storm, the diary could turn to the human details that made the event so vivid. A grieving widow weeping openly, a child hiding behind a mother's skirts, a group of soldiers quietly acknowledging the loss of a commander they admired. These intimate moments, interspersed with public displays of mourning and anger, highlighted the intersection of private grief and public spectacle. Caesar might have mused on the way memory and ritual entwine with political power, noting that even in death, he was influencing the thoughts and emotions of countless individuals. The diary could further explore the immediate consequences of the funeral. Antony's oration, while intended as a tribute, acted as a catalyst for riots, the looting of properties associated with conspirators, and an eruption of populist sentiment that could not easily be contained. The city's response illustrated the volatility of public opinion, especially when manipulated by persuasive speech. Caesar, through the lens of the diary, might have observed the ironic twist. An act meant to secure the Republic had instead strengthened his posthumous influence and empowered allies who would ultimately reshape Rome's political landscape. The procession itself, from the Forum to the pyre, might be detailed with vivid imagery, the banners fluttering, the citizens' mixed expressions of sorrow and anger, the incense and offerings rising in spiraling columns of smoke, and the deliberate pacing of Antony's speech in time with the movement of the mourners. The diary could reflect on the sensory immersion, the sights, sounds, and even smells of mourning, as an element of emotional manipulation, showing how the physical environment amplifies the impact of words and symbolism. Finally, the diary might reflect on the paradoxical nature of Antony's act, a tribute meant to honor the dead, yet one that unleashed fury and set the stage for civil war. Caesar could have imagined witnessing the power of his own narrative being reclaimed from death, noting that legacy is not simply what one does in life, but how others interpret, amplify, and enact that life after it has ended. In this way, the funeral and Antony's oration represented a turning point, not merely the ceremony, but the ignition of forces that would forever change Rome. This section would conclude by emphasizing the interplay of grief, rhetoric, and political calculation. The diary could capture the duality of human emotion and strategy, showing that even in moments of mourning, individuals respond with agency, creativity, and sometimes destructive power. The funeral became more than remembrance. It became a battlefield of ideas, loyalty, and memory, with Antony's oration as both weapon and torchbearer. Section 9. The Uprising and the Flight of the Conspirators. In the imagined diary of Julius Caesar, Section 9 captures the immediate upheaval that followed Mark Antony's stirring oration. As the city of Rome teetered on the brink of chaos, the diary would begin with Caesar observing from beyond the mortal veil the reaction of the people, who, though mournful, were now emboldened by anger and grief. Antony's careful rhetoric had sparked a chain reaction, igniting emotions that the conspirators had underestimated. Caesar's diary could reflect on the irony of the situation. A calculated assassination meant to protect the Republic had instead unleashed uncontrollable popular fury, demonstrating how human passion often eclipses even the most intricate political calculations. The diary might describe the streets of Rome filled with citizens who had been moved to action, their mourning transformed into a potent collective force. They surged through the Forum, demanding justice, seeking vengeance, and calling for accountability. Caesar could have noted the vivid, almost surreal imagery, the faces of ordinary Romans, merchants, slaves, soldiers, and scholars, etched with a mixture of grief and righteous indignation, their voices echoing like waves through the marble corridors of power. The diary might explore how anger and loyalty intertwined, showing that even in death, his influence could inspire both awe and fear. Caesar would surely remark on the plight of the conspirators themselves. Brutus, Cassius, and their fellow senators were forced into rapid flight, their previous confidence shattered by the realization that public sentiment had turned decisively against them. The diary could describe the conspirators' hurried preparations, hurriedly gathering belongings, locking their homes, and sending cryptic messages to allies. Caesar might observe with a mixture of detachment and fascination how quickly power and status could crumble under the weight of public emotion, emphasizing that authority is never secure, even for those who seem untouchable. As the diary continues, it might delve into the chaotic scenes in the streets. Citizens tore down the images and symbols associated with the conspirators, defaced statues, and looted properties, all while chanting Caesar's name. Caesar could reflect on the paradox that his death, intended to cement a political ideal, had instead consolidated his presence in the public consciousness. His diary might explore the emotional dynamics of a city in revolt, the mingling of fear, excitement, and vindictive joy, as if Rome itself were a living entity expressing grief and fury through its inhabitants. The narrative could then focus on Antony's strategic maneuvers. From the diary, Caesar might observe Antony calmly orchestrating responses to the uprising, maintaining control over the volatile populace while also ensuring the conspirators remained isolated and vulnerable. Antony's brilliance lay in his ability to balance empathy for the people's grief with calculated political acumen. The diary might describe Antony issuing decrees, organizing loyal troops, and simultaneously stoking just enough outrage to ensure that the conspirators' position became untenable. Caesar, in a reflective tone, could marvel at how leadership often requires a deep understanding of human psychology, where perception is as powerful as force. Caesar's diary could also turn attention to the conspirators' perspective. Brutus and Cassius, once confident in their moral and civic rationale, now faced a city ablaze with anger. The diary might describe their internal conflicts, their fear, and their attempts to rationalize the unfolding chaos. Caesar could note the dramatic irony. Those who had acted to preserve the Republic found themselves isolated and endangered, their ideals powerless against the emotional surge they had inadvertently provoked. The diary might dwell on the fleeting nature of political calculations and the unpredictability of human emotion in times of crisis. Amid the public uprising, the diary could explore smaller, intimate moments. Citizens consoling one another, soldiers protecting the innocent amidst the chaos, and children witnessing events that would shape the collective memory of Rome for generations. Caesar might reflect on how history is often remembered, not just for monumental speeches or battles, but also for these human-scale interactions that reveal the fragility and resilience of societies. The diary could highlight the tension between personal grief and collective action, showing how emotions, once stirred, can ripple far beyond their initial spark. The diary might also note the broader implications of the revolt. Antony's skillful manipulation of sentiment paved the way for the eventual rise of the Second Triumvirate, consisting of Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Caesar could comment on the irony that his death, intended as a safeguard for the Republic, had accelerated the consolidation of power into a new, more centralized authority. The diary could explore how historical events often unfold contrary to the intentions of those who initiate them, and how the unintended consequences of political acts can reshape entire civilizations. As the diary progresses, Caesar might describe the psychological effect on Rome's citizenry. The eruption of public fury created a shared sense of purpose and identity, binding disparate groups together through collective action. Yet, it also exposed the volatility of human societies, where loyalty and anger could shift the balance of power overnight. The diary could reflect on the lessons of history, noting that leadership, justice, and the maintenance of social order are deeply intertwined with the emotional currents of the people themselves. Finally, the diary would conclude section 9 by observing the lingering tension. The conspirators were in hiding, the city still reeling, and Antony consolidating influence, setting the stage for the coming civil wars. Caesar could reflect on the enduring power of narrative, rhetoric, and symbolism, realizing that even in death, one's legacy can ignite forces far greater than any single individual's ambition. The diary might close this section with the recognition that history is shaped not only by deeds, but by perception, emotion, and memory, each of which can alter the course of civilizations. Section 10. The March Towards Civil War and the Shadow of Revenge. In the imagined diary of Julius Caesar, Section 10 chronicles the tense period following the uprising in Rome, where the conspirators fled and Mark Antony began consolidating power. Caesar, from beyond the mortal plane, might observe the strategic, almost chess-like movements of Antony and Octavian, noting how the city, still reeling from grief and outrage, became the stage for the next act in a drama that would redefine the Roman world. The diary would begin by describing the fragile calm in Rome. The streets, once chaotic with mourning crowds, were now patrolled by Antony's loyalists, who maintained order while ensuring that the conspirators remained scattered and vulnerable. Caesar could note the eerie balance between control and instability, where the same people who had celebrated his assassination were now fearful of the growing military presence, and how fear often served as a more powerful tool than loyalty. From his celestial vantage, Caesar might describe Octavian's careful preparation in the north of Italy, amassing supporters and forging alliances while maintaining a veneer of legality and honor. The diary would emphasize the contrast between Antony's impassioned oratory and Octavian's calculated diplomacy, portraying the two as complementary forces in the emerging Second Triumvirate. Caesar could reflect on the irony that his death, meant to safeguard Republican ideals, had instead created an opportunity for two leaders to consolidate unprecedented authority, illustrating how the unintended consequences of political actions often ripple through generations. The diary could explore the conspirators' perspective as well, showing Brutus and Cassius struggling with both the physical and psychological consequences of their flight. Caesar might note their growing paranoia as alliances frayed and old friends hesitated to openly support them for fear of Antony's retribution. The diary would delve into their internal conflicts, the tension between moral conviction and survival, the slow realization that justice, as they understood it, was elusive, and that the people's loyalty to Caesar had shifted the balance of power irrevocably. These observations could illustrate a universal truth in Caesar's reflections. Ideals alone cannot govern a world driven by emotion, ambition, and the ever-shifting tides of human loyalty. As the narrative unfolds, Caesar's diary might describe the strategic use of propaganda. Antony's control over Rome allowed him to shape the narrative of Caesar's assassination, presenting the conspirators as traitors to the Republic and martyrs to their own hubris. Public monuments were repaired or repurposed to commemorate Caesar, while Antony's speeches reinforced his position as the executor of justice. Caesar could reflect on the profound power of perception, understanding that the memory of deeds, manipulated and magnified, can wield as much influence as the deeds themselves. The diary might dwell on the subtle ways in which emotion, persuasion, and image controlled events, often more decisively than swords or armies. The diary could further explore the growing tension in the provinces. Regions loyal to Caesar sent word and support to Antony and Octavian, while other areas saw the conspirators pause as morally just and politically urgent. Caesar might note the remarkable ability of human societies to fracture along lines of loyalty and ideology, illustrating how civil strife often arises not only from ambition, but also from competing narratives of morality and justice. He could comment on the role of communication, rumor, and perception in shaping the alliances and enmities that would dictate the unfolding conflict. Within this section, Caesar might also provide reflections on the human cost of the looming civil war. The diary could depict soldiers preparing for battle, families displaced, and the anxiety of citizens caught between conflicting forces. Caesar could note the juxtaposition of ordinary lives against the grand sweep of history, emphasizing the fragility of peace and the suddenness with which political machinations can thrust entire communities into danger. He might reflect philosophically on the inevitability of suffering when power is contested, and how even well-intentioned actions, like the conspirators' assassination, can unleash waves of unintended violence. Caesar's diary might explore the psychological strategies employed by both sides. Antony, adept at reading public sentiment, ensured that fear, reverence, and outrage were carefully balanced to maintain popular support. Octavian, though young and calculating, used promises of stability, alliances, and restitution to draw followers, presenting himself as both pragmatic and morally grounded. Caesar could note how leadership requires understanding the intricacies of human desire and emotion, illustrating that the success of any campaign depends as much on manipulating hearts and minds as on the deployment of armies. As the diary progresses, Caesar might describe the early skirmishes and maneuvers that signaled the inevitability of full-scale conflict. Intelligence networks, covert negotiations, and rapid troop movements illustrated a strategic sophistication that rivaled any battle he had witnessed in life. The diary could reflect on the tension between the personal and the political, the way that individual choices of loyalty, courage, or betrayal intersected with large-scale historical forces. Caesar could marvel at how the human element remains decisive, even amidst complex strategic planning and logistical considerations. Section 10 of the diary might also dwell on Antony and Octavian's negotiations, portraying their uneasy alliance. While united in their goal of punishing the conspirators, their ambitions were distinct, foreshadowing the eventual rift that would lead to the ultimate consolidation of power under Octavian. Caesar could reflect on the delicate balance of cooperation and competition, emphasizing that political alliances are rarely permanent, often shaped by shifting advantage rather than enduring trust. The diary could explore how ambition, foresight, and opportunism intersect, shaping outcomes far beyond the immediate intentions of any single actor. Finally, the diary could contemplate the inevitability of the civil war that was now unfolding. Caesar, observing from beyond life, might reflect on the tragic cycles of ambition and revenge, the unpredictability of human emotion, and the ways in which his death had become a catalyst for forces far greater than himself. The section could close with a meditation on history itself, how the interplay of loyalty, passion, and strategy can create outcomes that no single person can fully control, and how legacy is forged not only by deeds, but by the reactions, interpretations, and memories of generations to come. Section 11. The Pivotal Battles and the Fall of Brutus and Cassius. In the imagined diary of Julius Caesar, Section 11 would shift focus to the turbulent months of the Civil War, where the conspirators' dreams of restoring the Republic collided with the inexorable rise of Antony and Octavian. From beyond life, Caesar could observe the tense strategies, the careful deployments of legions, and the small yet decisive choices that shaped the outcome of battles he had foreseen but could not influence directly. The diary might open with a detailed account of the early confrontations, describing how Brutus and Cassius, though experienced generals, struggled to maintain cohesion among their troops in the face of coordinated campaigns by the Second Triumvirate. Caesar could note the contrast between the conspirators' reliance on moral justification and their opponents' pragmatic focus on loyalty, discipline, and resources. This juxtaposition would illustrate a recurring theme in Caesar's reflections, that noble intentions often falter when confronted with the unyielding mechanics of power. The diary could provide intimate glimpses into the psyche of Brutus and Cassius. Brutus, haunted by the memory of Caesar's murder and the moral weight of his actions, is portrayed as a man torn between honor and pragmatism. Caesar could comment on the human tendency to overestimate virtue in the heat of political struggle, showing how Brutus's reliance on ethical authority made him vulnerable to manipulation and misjudgment. Cassius, by contrast, driven by envy and personal ambition, struggles to maintain unity among the ranks, revealing the fragility of alliances built on fear or fleeting loyalty. The diary might underscore that leadership requires not only courage, but an acute awareness of human motivation, a lesson Brutus and Cassius learned tragically too late. As the narrative unfolds, Caesar could chronicle the decisive battles, beginning with the confrontation at Philippi. He might describe the strategic maneuvers, the placement of legions, and the clever use of terrain by both sides. While the diary's tone is observational, there is an undercurrent of tension, capturing the unpredictable human element of warfare. A commander's hesitation, a soldier's act of bravery, or the ripple effect of rumors spreading through the ranks. Caesar might reflect on how chance, perception, and morale often determine outcomes as much as skill or preparation, emphasizing the precarious balance between order and chaos in any military campaign. The diary could also highlight key turning points, such as the death of Cassius, who, misled by reports of Brutus's supposed defeat, chooses to end his life. Caesar might describe the tragic irony of Cassius's demise. A man so intent on shaping destiny through conspiracy falls victim to misperception, illustrating the vulnerability of even the most cunning minds when faced with the fog of war. The diary could delve into Brutus's subsequent decisions, portraying a commander who, though intellectually formidable, struggles to maintain cohesion as his forces waver. Caesar's reflections could meditate on the intersection of morality, fear, and human error, underscoring the inevitability of consequences when ambition and miscalculation collide. In addition to military tactics, the diary could explore the emotional resonance of the battlefield. Caesar might describe the soldier's exhaustion, the grief of witnessing comrades fall, and the complex interplay of loyalty, fear, and hope that drives men in conflict. He could note how ordinary human experiences, hunger, fatigue, camaraderie, intersect with extraordinary historical events, showing that even grand narratives are constructed from countless individual stories. The diary might dwell on the paradox of war, its capacity for both heroism and tragedy, and the strange ways that human emotion can turn a tactical advantage into defeat or vice versa. The diary could also focus on Antony and Octavian's strategic brilliance. Caesar might observe how Antony, with his commanding presence, inspires troops to act with initiative, while Octavian's meticulous planning ensures coordination across multiple fronts. Together, they exploit the weaknesses in the conspirators' forces, turning hesitation and miscommunication into decisive opportunities. Caesar could reflect on the delicate interplay of personality and strategy, showing how the human dimension of leadership, charisma, trust, and perception can tip the balance even when armies are evenly matched on paper. As the battles progress, the diary might narrate the final moments of Brutus, who, after the fall of Philippi, chooses to take his own life rather than face capture. Caesar could reflect on the paradox of Brutus's end. A man who killed in the name of honor dies trying to preserve it, leaving history to judge both his courage and his failures. The diary might highlight the profound sadness of witnessing the collapse of ideals and the personal toll exacted by political and military ambition, offering a meditation on the fragility of human plans in the face of larger historical forces. The diary could also examine the aftermath of the battles, portraying the triumvirate's consolidation of power and the reordering of Rome. Caesar might describe the mixture of fear, relief, and exhaustion among the populace, as well as the subtle political maneuvers used to ensure loyalty and obedience. Through these observations, the diary emphasizes that victory is not only the product of military might, but also of psychological insight, governance, and perception. Caesar could reflect on how memory, narrative, and symbolism shape the legacy of leaders as much as the tangible outcomes of war. Finally, Section 11 might close with a broader philosophical meditation. Caesar, observing the tragic arc of the conspirators' rise and fall, could reflect on the limits of human agency, the unpredictability of events, and the ways in which ambition, morality, and circumstance intertwine. The diary could underscore that even the best-laid plans are subject to chance, human error, and the complex currents of history. It might end with a recognition that while the conspirators' names endure, their legacy is inseparable from the consequences of their actions, a reminder that history is a tapestry woven from both intention and happenstance. Section 12. Rome's transformation under Antony and Octavian. In Section 12 of Julius Caesar's imagined diary, the narrative turns from the battlefield to the broader consequences of the conspirators' defeat and the emergence of a new Roman order under Mark Antony and Octavian. From beyond life, Caesar could observe how Rome, once fractured by civil war and political assassinations, undergoes a transformation driven by both pragmatism and ambition. This section would detail the consolidation of power by the Second Triumvirate, the reshaping of political institutions, and the social, economic, and cultural impact of their rule, offering readers a window into the fragile interplay between authority, public perception, and historical destiny. The diary might open with an account of Octavian's strategic genius. Caesar could describe the young leader's ability to blend diplomacy with intimidation, gradually absorbing territories and allies, while neutralizing potential rivals. Octavian's meticulous planning and cautious maneuvering contrast sharply with Antony's charismatic but impulsive style. The diary could explore how Octavian's focus on legal legitimacy, propaganda, and symbolic gestures, such as presenting himself as the avenger of Caesar, ensures both the loyalty of the Senate and the support of the populace. Caesar might reflect on the importance of perception in political power, emphasizing that authority is not merely enforced, but cultivated through narrative, ritual, and image. Antony's role in this transformation would also be carefully examined. Caesar could note Antony's skill in inspiring troops, commanding attention, and forging alliances with influential figures, particularly in the eastern provinces. However, the diary could also highlight the vulnerabilities inherent in Antony's reliance on personal charm and military reputation, showing how his decisions, shaped by both passion and pride, gradually sow the seeds of political tension. Through these observations, the diary might illustrate a recurring theme in Caesar's reflections: the delicate balance between charisma and strategy in leadership, and the ways in which personal temperament can shape historical outcomes. The diary might explore the social and economic repercussions of the triumvirate's consolidation of power. Caesar could describe how land redistribution, proscriptions, and military settlements aim to secure loyalty and reward supporters, yet simultaneously breed fear and resentment among those excluded. He might note the human cost of political survival, emphasizing that history is not only written in victories and decrees, but in the everyday experiences of soldiers, citizens, and displaced families. By focusing on these lived realities, the diary offers a deeply human perspective on what is often reduced to abstract political analysis. Cultural shifts could also be a focus of the diary. Caesar might observe how Antony and Octavian use festivals, games, and public ceremonies to reinforce their authority and craft a sense of unity in a fractured republic. The diary could explore the symbolic power of spectacle, how theatrical gestures, monumental architecture, and carefully staged rituals serve both to legitimize rule and to create a shared identity among citizens. Caesar could reflect on the interplay between culture and politics, suggesting that governance is as much about shaping belief and perception as it is about controlling territory. Caesar's reflections might extend to the uneasy relationship between the triumvirs themselves. He could describe the subtle tensions between Antony and Octavian, shaped by ambition, pride, and differing visions for Rome's future. These interpersonal dynamics, the diary might suggest, are as decisive as military victories in determining historical outcomes. Caesar could meditate on the fragile nature of alliances built on convenience rather than shared ideology, noting that political structures often mirror the personalities and ambitions of their architects. The diary could also highlight Antony's relationship with Cleopatra, exploring how personal alliances can influence geopolitics. Caesar might observe that Antony's devotion to Cleopatra, while emotionally authentic, creates strategic vulnerabilities and fuels opposition among Roman elites. The narrative might emphasize the tension between private desire and public duty, illustrating how the personal lives of leaders can reverberate through history. Caesar could note that while loyalty and love can inspire courage, they can also generate conflict and misjudgment, reminding readers that human motivations are never easily separated from political action. Octavian's long-term vision for Rome would also be detailed. Caesar could describe his efforts to project stability, consolidate wealth, and carefully prepare the path to imperial authority. The diary might explore how Octavian's attention to propaganda, family alliances, and legislative reform enables him to outmaneuver rivals, demonstrating the interplay of patience, foresight, and strategic communication in achieving lasting power. Caesar could reflect that true historical influence often emerges not from immediate victories, but from the cumulative effect of deliberate, calculated choices. Throughout this section, the diary might emphasize the psychological dimension of power. Caesar could reflect on how fear, loyalty, hope, and ambition shape behavior at every level, from generals to soldiers to senators. He might explore how leaders exploit these forces to maintain control, highlighting the subtle art of governance as a negotiation between human desire and institutional authority. By focusing on these dynamics, the diary provides a nuanced meditation on the complexity of political life in a time of upheaval. Finally, Section 12 could conclude with a reflection on the broader trajectory of Roman history. Caesar might observe that the republic structures, strained by decades of internal conflict, are gradually giving way to a more centralized form of governance. The diary could suggest that while the names of individuals matter, it is the underlying social, economic, and political currents that ultimately shape historical destiny. Caesar could end the section with a contemplative meditation that Rome, like all great civilizations, is a living organism, resilient yet fragile, and that the legacy of its leaders is inseparable from the ebb and flow of human ambition, fortune, and circumstance. Section 13. Legacy and Reflections. Caesar's Final Words. Section 13 of Julius Caesar's imagined diary brings the narrative full circle, reflecting on the enduring consequences of his life, death, and the transformation of Rome under Antony, Octavian, and the generations that followed. In this final section, the diary would combine historical observation, personal reflection, and philosophical meditation, offering a calm yet compelling window into Caesar's perspective on power, mortality, and legacy. It serves as the closing meditation, blending political insight with a poignant human voice, leaving readers with both understanding and awe at the complexity of history. The diary could begin with Caesar contemplating the paradox of immortality through memory. Though his physical life was cut short on the Ides of March, the ripple effects of his actions and reforms continue to shape Rome. Caesar might write about how the republic he once sought to stabilize is gradually transforming into an empire under Octavian. He could reflect that while political institutions shift and leaders rise and fall, the essence of influence is neither permanent nor entirely controllable. It is preserved through memory, narrative, and the interpretation of those who survive. This reflection underscores the diary's recurring theme. History is both lived and remembered, and the human desire for permanence often clashes with the impermanence of life. Caesar could then examine the moral complexity of ambition. From beyond the grave, he observes the ambitions of Antony, Octavian, and even the senators who conspired against him. The diary might explore how each actor's choices are shaped by personal motives, fears, and desires, highlighting the tension between public beauty and private interest. Caesar could meditate on the dual nature of ambition. It drives achievement and innovation, but it also seeds conflict and betrayal. Through this reflection, the diary invites readers to consider that power is not simply exercised in action, but is continually negotiated through perception, loyalty, and strategy. The diary could also offer vivid accounts of the consequences of human choices on ordinary citizens. Caesar might describe the impact of political upheaval, civil war, and power struggles on Roman families, soldiers, and communities. By focusing on the human dimension, he could emphasize that history is not merely a chronicle of battles and decrees, but a living tapestry of personal suffering, courage, and resilience. Caesar might reflect that true legacy is measured not only in monuments or titles, but in the ways societies adapt, endure, and remember the past. A major part of this section could explore the role of memory and storytelling in shaping historical truth. Caesar might observe how his life and death are recounted differently by supporters, detractors, poets, and historians. The diary could highlight the ways in which narrative is manipulated, mythologized, or forgotten entirely. Caesar could write that while he cannot control these interpretations from the beyond, he can observe their influence and the subtle ways in which stories shape collective identity, values, and lessons learned. This reflection reinforces the idea that legacy is as much about perception as it is about achievement. The diary might also touch upon the evolution of Rome itself. Caesar could reflect that the transition from republic to empire is neither sudden nor inevitable, but a complex interplay of ambition, circumstance, and public sentiment. He might note that Octavian's ultimate success lies not in brute force, but in his ability to unify, inspire, and stabilize a fractured city. Antony's brilliance and charm, while formidable, could not overcome the structural and psychological advantages that Octavian leveraged. These observations emphasize that history is shaped by both individual talent and the larger forces of culture, society, and timing. Caesar could then turn to philosophical musings, considering the nature of mortality and influence. From beyond life, he might reflect on the fleeting nature of power and the enduring weight of ideas. He could write that while life is finite, the ripple of choices, the structures built, and the lessons conveyed can persist across centuries. This meditation would offer a calm, contemplative tone, inviting readers to consider the relationship between human ambition and the inexorable flow of time. Caesar might suggest that true greatness is measured not by domination alone, but by the capacity to leave a world subtly altered, a society reshaped, and minds inspired. The diary could conclude with a personal reflection on the paradox of his own death. Caesar might describe the mixture of betrayal, shock, and sorrow that marked his final hours, alongside a profound recognition that his absence catalyzed events far beyond his imagining. He could reflect that even in death, he continues to influence the trajectory of Rome, shaping the ambitions, fears, and decisions of those who follow. This duality, absence yet influence, underscores the tension between human vulnerability and enduring impact, leaving readers with a deep sense of both fragility and continuity. Finally, the outro would gently draw the diary to a close, a calm meditation on history, humanity, and memory. Caesar could write that while empires rise and fall, and leaders come and go, the stories we leave behind continue to ripple outward, shaping the hearts and minds of those who come after. He might leave readers with the thought that understanding the past is not merely an exercise in scholarship, but an invitation to contemplate ambition, morality, and the threads that connect one generation to the next.